Failed implementations can put B2B marketers at risk of losing credibility and budget. They need to plan properly, take calculated risks, and always have a backup plan. So how can marketing teams ensure their Martech implementation is geared up for success? Welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Klepp. Today, I'll be talking to Raja Walia, who will be answering this question. He's the founder and CEO of GNW Consulting, a strategic marketing operations agency that specializes in helping companies navigate the complexities of marketing technology. Tune in to find out more about what this B2B marketer's mission is. Mr. Raja Walia, welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thank you for having me, Christian.
Great to have you on the show, Raja, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I think a part of this is going to be a little bit of a tougher discussion, and that's just a bit of a hint of what's to come. That said, I think it's an extremely important conversation to have, and B2B marketers really need to be paying attention to this stuff. So let's dive right in. Raja, you're on a mission to provide companies with the strategic guidance needed to adapt to the ever-evolving Martech landscape. So for this conversation, I want to focus on the following topic: how marketing teams can ensure their Martech implementation is geared up for success. So just to provide the audience with a bit of context, your company, so GNW Consulting, in partnership with DemandMetric, you recently launched the State of Martech implementation report, and that was based on insights from more than 200 marketing leaders. So I want to kick off the conversation with this question. How do failed implementations put marketing teams at risk of losing credibility and budget?
No, it's a good question. And one of the reasons that we generated the report is I think it's very crucial, especially in today's economy where, budgets are kind of being hit as much as possible and marketing is always under the gun. Because you got to realize that at executive level, outcomes are all realistically that matter. So when we think about the idea of a failed implementation, what we're really thinking about is what was promised and what didn't occur. And that's how, at the executive board level, generally how we look at it. So it's not only that the CMO takes a hit, it's the finance gets involved and starts questioning whether marketing should really be trusted with budget at all at that point, right? What execs and generally what marketing teams kind of forget is that failure usually kind of starts from an implementation perspective by it's not bad tech, it's the idea of what the business goals and outcomes are. And we tend to fall down this rabbit hole of a kind of like a traditional motion of implementation. Whereas in the current state of things, it's a technical implementation aligned with what the business is set to accomplish. And we don't, as marketers, we don't really convey that. Like we don't really emphasize how it's going to solve bigger problems. So I think the idea behind the report realistically was that we lose credibility because we're so focused on the technical that we don't really operate and say, this is what the business is doing better now than they were doing before. And that's generally, I think, we're not factoring those ideas well enough, and we're just focusing on the tech and how well the tech is implemented.
Absolutely. Maybe this is stated in the report, but I'd also like to get your perspective just from your experience, right? And I know that this can go down several different paths, but just why do you think implementations fail? From a general perspective, where do marketing teams get it wrong generally?
So I think if you think logistically about implementations, it's the idea of what you're doing and how it's going to help the business grow. Once again, executives don't really look at tech the same way that we look at tech. They see it as kind of an end to a means. The means is one of the things, either grow the business, expand the business, or market the business. So realistically, when we treat implementations just like a system implementation or a system upgrade or enhancement, I think that's step one. That's where generally that operational mindset starts down the path of, okay, now we are focusing on just the technical outcome, but not how it relates to what the goal of the business is. So I think, and it's a very clear fix. Like we've worked with a lot of companies, and the idea is like, what is the ownership across functions, and how is it going to relate to overall business goals? That's a conversation that generally, as marketers, we need to have a lot more of to say, what are we solving for the business rather than what are we implementing for the business? And honestly, like too many times we kind of buy software and it said, and we ask, well, what can it do? Which is completely opposite of what we should be doing. We should be going in with the idea of this is what the business is trying to do. How does your software make our life easier or fulfill this task, right? And I think it's just a switch in thought process on how we look at marketing technology.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to move us on to the next question about what are some of the key pitfalls that you think marketing teams should be avoiding, and what should they be doing instead?
So I think the reality of this is that what we outlined in the report is that most implementations actually fail before even the kickoff of the implementation that happens, right? So we assume that implementations are a checklist of things that need to be done. Milestone, we base everything off on milestones, cutovers, and we treat it like kind of an operational shift, more of a changing of the guards, kind of so to speak, right? But we don't clarify roles, we don't clarify outcomes, we don't map out processes, we don't even kind of really teams are brought in as implementation is happening rather than essentially aligning with all these different departments on where their goals are and how technology is going to fill those gaps, right? It doesn't matter how good the tool is, it all depends on how each department sometimes is going to use it. So when we talk about teams who generally buy software, that's the pitfall of it, right? The biggest hole is um, kind of a double-edged knife. Like the state of Martech report shows that marketing software has increased by a ridiculous amount over the last 10 years. So it's more we're buying software and we're not solving business problems. And that's one of it, right? Like we have to treat implementations like it's a business change, not an upgrade, right? We have to budget for enablement. And that's the kick thing about enablement is that people tend to implement a product and it's kind of like a I win button, right? Like you hit the button and it's just going to run. And the reality is there's an entire change management, there's an adoption process that we fail to kind of take. We just think the software is going to get set up, we're going to hire someone and they're just going to take it over. And the reality is when we don't have conversations about who owns what and what the business is attempting to do with a product, then at that point it just becomes another software solution that someone is operating out of, which does not relate, which just does not trickle upstream. It does not have any relationship to what the business goals is, or what the business goal is, or what the outcome that's expected. So if no one owns that kind of the results and no one's accountable for the failure, it's going to go back to whoever started that initiative, which in this case is going to be the marketing team. So.
Yeah, you brought up a really great point, and I've seen that go awry sometimes. Like it's that complete lack of ownership, that lack of clarity from the get go of who is owning this, who is responsible for whatever task it is and whichever milestones, and even that checking in process, so called, right? Like as you're moving along in the implementation, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're so focused on milestones of data points of when implementation has to be successful. There's no milestones on, hey, are we close to hitting what the business intended to do? Are we close to addressing all of the reasons why we need software? The milestones are always just very heavily focused on we need to have this much data or this needs to be set up by this date. Right? And that's once again, that's not in my opinion, that's not worth investing in. Like, as the owner of a company, I'm not investing in when all our data is going to be moved from one location to the other location. It's do we need all the data or are we trying to do something better with it? That's the goal, right? And we're trying to make things easier, more efficient. We're trying to scale things, we're trying to onboard. Like there has to be an end result, not just a product to product shift, which honestly is not really worth investing in. And that's when we talk about like budgets getting cut. That's when budgets get cut. That's when we lose, the quote unquote seat at the table is because you're not trusted to understand how business impact is being applied to software.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Based on the report and also your experience, of course, what do you believe is the hidden revenue impact of misaligned technology investments?
So, so based on the report, I think there's a kind of a clear understanding that revenue markers, and whether it's in the capacity of opportunities, in the capacity of uh, going up to bat, so to speak, getting enough data, getting enough leads to essentially pitch to, that there is a equivalency of that in relationship to what the cost of implementing is, right? So if we just look at from a revenue, like there isn't a hard number. However, it's the efficiency of delaying campaigns, not having a staff appropriated and understanding how to work inside the environment that lead to downstream effects, right? The short term revenue is the cost of the products that you're implementing, right? It's the cost of the resources that you've been staffed with. It's the cost of partners that you've kind of partnered with. That's a short term goal. But really, the emphasis is where does revenue impact, and it's a compounding value over time. It's a slow system. It leads to campaign launches being not going, uh, not being essentially set on time, routing, sales follow ups. I mean, the first complaint of a mismanaged implementation is the sales team raising their hand and saying, "Hey, we don't see a single lead, or we don't see a single prospect that we can work with. Like there's pipeline inconsistencies that are happening, right?" And that's where the first complaints start happening. Well, now if you think about what a sales team is supposed to be doing, is now they're more spending more time working outside of the system rather than within the system. So the delay in, I mean, they still have to hit their quotas. So the delay in understanding what that system is really providing goes away. Well, now you might have bad data issues, right? But from a leadership takeaway perspective, it's the long-term revenue impact of, and I'm trying to think of the exact number that's essentially that they provided, but it's upwards in, depending on the size of the business. A small size business will see impact in hundreds and thousands of dollars of revenue, and an enterprise will see $1 million of impact based off on the report over over time, over the compounding of just things not working as they intended over a period of time.
I mean, the part where you brought up the issue with sales, where they're talking about like pipeline inconsistencies, I think was the word that you used. That in itself would already be a bit of a red flag because if the sales already start complaining about that, um, that can have a snowball effect on the entire implementation.
Well, yeah, and a lot of that is uncovered prior to implementation happening, and a lot of it is uncovered post implementation where the budget has already been spent. So at that point, you're kind of creating a band aid solution, right? The idea behind this report is that there's different, out of the executives that we kind of interviewed for the report, there's a varying degree of what the revenue impact is because each business model works different. Each sales pipeline, sales stages, and sales funnels work differently. But the idea is that no matter how you dissect it, we could give some arbitrary number like, hey, you have millions of dollars and $2 million of impact, per quarter. The reality is, due to the inefficiencies of implementation and the misalignment, there is a bleed effect of revenue quarter over quarter because it's in two aspects. One is just reaching out to appropriate people at the right time, and two, just missing opportunities that sales is either not taking into consideration or have glazed over. It could be 100% of a very valued opportunity, and marketing could be right that this person is qualified and they want to do business with us, but the precedence has already been set that there is no trust there. So the sales will move off of their own, will work on their own kind of basis, right? And I think there's an idea of that is that, yes, there is a revenue impact long term. Everyone in the report has said there's a revenue impact. If you want a concrete dollar value, that's a little bit tough based on business to business.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you brought up one topic, Raja, which I thought was a great segue to the next question about the importance of preventing this implementation failure. What's the importance of conducting the right research, having the right plan in place before any of this happens?
When we usually start, and when we usually start and we have these conversations, the goal is to build build a system based off on data and facts. If you build a system or migrate to a system because you've used it before, or it's around assumption, that's a very dangerous game to play, right? So you don't want to just launch something. You want to scale intelligently and effectively. And that can only kind of happen when you have a really good blueprint and understanding of what the business use case is. You have to know where the process gaps are. You have to know if your data is even ready for it, right? There's a lot of times, and you've ran into this before, Christian, as well, where start an implementation not knowing what the data limitations are, not connecting with the data team, and then you're in the thick of it and you're implementing, and the data is like, hey, the data is not going to be ready for 3 months. Boom. What is that going to cost the company, right? What is the cost of the company? And here's one thing before I get into like what we can do to solve it, is that what the report showed is that there's data and revenue. And let's not talk about revenue. Let's just say money, right? There's money being lost on both ends. The cost of implementation and delaying implementation of a product because you're already spending money to do it. And two, the downstream effects of all of that. So not only is your budget getting hit, that you're losing money in your investment that could have been, who knows, you could have spent it on AdWords and generated, maybe a couple leads or whatever it is that you could have attributed to. And two, the downstream effects of actually having an improper implementation. So really what that said is like, if you're a leader in the space, what you really have to push for and you really have to push against is the idea of doing something quickly and fast and say, what are we trying to solve? Like that is the number one question, regardless of what a platform does. At this point, we're a pretty tech agnostic company. I've been inside all of these platforms for the last 15 years. And the reality is like, what are you trying to solve as a business? What is your goal? And if you don't know that, your implementation is already off to the wrong foot. Second, who's involved? What are the teams that it's going to impact, right? In our, and I can kind of generally answer that question since we're, we're in a B2B marketing podcast. It's generally going to be marketing. It's generally going to be sales. It's generally going to be customer success, right? Like those are the teams that are going to be involved. And one follow-up question is like, what are you trying to do better, right? What are the data points that you're trying to hit that is going to make this entire implementation and shift worth it? Which is a question that rarely gets asked, right? It's, we're implementing this project or product, fix it into what you do. And I think the main thing is like, what does success mean and how does it show up to each of these teams? Sales will answer, I need to know when to contact someone. I need those signals because that's very crucial to me. Customer success and the customer success teams would be like, I need to know when people are up for renewals. If you're in a licensing subscription model, I need to know if they're having an issue with product onboarding. I need to know, financially how the business is doing. Because they need to know all of these things from a renewal perspective. Are they even using the platform? So that type of like, if you were to take like those three things before you even start investing into what technologies, that strategy is going to protect your budget from being spent twice. One to do it, once to implement it, another to fix it, right? And those are three very good questions before you even go down the rabbit hole of looking at 15,000 pieces of technology that you may or may not need.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, you already answered the next question about the actionable tips, because that's pretty much what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll say this though. I'll expand onto it. Right.
Sure.
Those are three high level items, but let's expand onto the idea of like real world scenarios that leaders have to expect. Right. And this is something that you take away and you write it down on a sticky note and you just stick it there and you're saying, hey, I'm going to implement something for sales or I'm going to implement something from marketing, and it's universal, no matter what business you work at. Right. You want to audit and execution your bottlenecks. Where are the handoffs or campaigns slowing down? Tech at that point should be a lever to move them, not a blocker. If it's a blocker or if it's not needed or if there's a workaround, then you really have to look at, am I investing something to fix a process or am I investing something because of tech? And this is one of the most crucial things, especially if you're in the C-suite and you're in the and you're a marketer. So CMOs, CROs, you have to speak the language of the board, the committee, the CEO, whoever it is. You have to speak their language. You have to say, this product and this feature is going to help us achieve this business goal. If you can't map it to sales efficiency, pipeline health, customer retention, question is, why did we pay for it? Number one question that gets asked, why did we pay for it if it's not going to increase sales efficiency, if we're not impacting our pipeline health or moving people, and if it's not retaining customers, what is the purpose behind the product, right? Uh, and and people will argue on that point. There are certain things, right? There are certain things that people will say, well, what about PR, for example? What about brand recognition? You can't really tie that to a revenue. And once again, I clarify, it's not revenue, it's a goal. Brand is the perception of your company. It makes sales more efficient as sellers. If you're a recognized business, sales can leverage it, right? So I want to make sure I understand and make sure I differentiate between tying everything to business initiatives does not mean tying it to revenue. It's tying it to what the outcomes are, right? And also you got to involve your go-to-market stakeholders. This is, personally, I've been inside the space for long enough, and even in the implementation report, uh, sales, customer success, marketing operations, usually get involved after a decision is made. You should really be aligning them with that before launch, because that's that helps and avoid rebuilds or restructures. And the number one thing that gets skipped, I'm going to throw it out to you, Christian. What do you think the number one thing that gets skipped in all of implementations is?
Oh,
And let's forget technology.
yeah.
Let's forget everything else. Let's all of the stuff. But the number one thing that really kind of impacts how your system is going to be used over time.
Well, what about auditing what's currently working?
So auditing what's currently working, but also enablement of your team that's going to be managing the platform. No one budgets for it.
Right.
No one
Right.
says,
Fair.
hey, we've implemented this.
Mm.
We're going to have some sort of ongoing training. So and here's the crazy part. People might be surprised to learn this, but software products have updates, and they have quarterly updates, monthly updates, right? They have biannually updates. Sometimes there's hot fixes that completely breaks it. No one takes into account what the cost of investing and budgeting for actual hands-on training really means. It's not a training that is post-implementation support. It's what is your internal team going to need in order to operate the system without constant external help. And I know that sounds really funny coming from an agency that has really built a model around external help, but the reality is product is going to change. An update could come across and completely bypass a flow or a workflow or some sort of technical thing that you set up, right? And then that's the reality of software. But no one invests in that constant update of products. People invest in implementation, and but they don't invest in an internal team. And the last thing, because I like to doing things in fives, I feel five is a lucky number. Start with a narrow MVP, right? Like, let's prove an impact with a small use case, and then let's expand it once the system earns trust internally. Far too many times, the leadership team sits there and paints this picture of a beautiful utopian view of a system that is so cohesive once implementation is done. And implementation to me is just the starting point, right? So narrow your MVP into what you can solve. It'll save you money because you won't need a bunch of features. Remember, features can always be added on later in time. But I think if you take those like 5 things when it comes to be like as a B2B marketer and as a leader, and you take those into consideration, it's really hard to have a failed implementation when all those things are aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that point you said about updates, I would even throw in, and this may or may not be completely off, but also anticipating that sometimes with software, with technology, things can go wrong and you need to have a backup plan for that. Right. And perhaps this is a bit far fetched, but I think we all remember the CrowdStrike outage.
Yeah.
Right.
Or even a domain outage, or even necessarily something with it was the most recent one. We received a notification from one of the platforms that we said that there was an outage to the cloud server that hosted everything. You couldn't get access to a product. Remember the Slack outage?
Yes.
People didn't know what to do, right? Like,
Yes.
I'm not sure you have to implement Slack, but these things happen even at the highest tier of companies that own these products. And And I'll tell you, Christian, like people do not budget for it. Companies do not budget for their internal teams to make sure that they're, understanding what the system updates are and what they're pushing. So when something happens, it's like, all right, I'll get a coffee until systems are back. And then the executive team's like, wait. We need to figure out what's going on here,
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Metrics. So in terms of what we've been talking about now, what metrics do you think marketing teams should be paying attention to and why?
I'm going to say revenue, and that's all I'm going to say about it, because that is the ultimate goal. If you're a for-profit business, the end goal of metrics is a no-brainer that you have to be contributing, attributing, influencing some sort of revenue statistics. That is mandatory. That is the baseline minimum that you have to be doing, right? If you're a for-profit organization. Now, let's talk about. Let's forget vanity metrics. No one cares about open clicks and conversion rates and stuff like that. Let's focus on the tactical and operational ones that impact a business rhythm, right? A business flow, let's just say. Time to campaign. How fast are you prepared to get a campaign out the door? How fast are you able to pivot with a strategy, assuming that there's a fluctuation in the market? And, I can tell you a couple examples very specifically of a product launch that fell on the same day as a outage. How fast can you pivot to not have a product launch on that day, right? And can you convey that information effectively enough to the leadership to say, hey, it would not impact us. We're not going to get good results out of this, right? So what is your time to campaign? What is your time to pivot and change based off of it? Sales response to handoff, right? I think it's very clear to say that we don't live in 2018 anymore, or 2015 or 2013, when marketing and sales had at least 24 hours, maybe 48 hours to respond. I don't want to say it's instantaneous. However, it's sales response times. If you as your listeners and yourself haven't realized,
Should be fast.
you go in,
yeah,
you fill out a form, you get a call almost immediately, right? I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, depending on the product that you're selling. But what is your response time? What is your post lead handoff when sales call someone when something is identified? And if you can tell at the executive level, our sales response time is this fast or this clarified, that's a very good metric. And if you don't know it and you're listening and you don't know that metric, that would be a very good starting point, because that's what tells you as a business how fast we're going to market, how fast our sales teams are reaching out. Conversion from lead, and here's the kicker, not marketing qualified. We can have a separate conversation on my whole stance on marketing qualified leads. But from when a person is created to a qualified opportunity. Now, if you're in the traditional sense of the world, I probably jumped lead to contact conversion to, I've jumped the anonymous to known to engaged to qualified to sales accepted to sales qualified to opportunity. I've jumped all of that from lead to qualified op. The reason being, everything else in the middle is fluff, right? From an executive standpoint, you can tell me I have 1,000 marketing qualified leads. At the end of the day, qualified ops is what you're measured against no matter what. That's just the day. And then also your influence and attribute, like what you attributed to those qualified ops. 7 years ago, 8 years ago, those conversion metrics were all over the place, right? Oh, we generated, 1,000 marketing qualified. We sales accepted this much and sales qualified this. And nowadays it's okay, cool. All of that stuff doesn't matter. How many qualified opportunities? What is their percentage to close? That's what they care about. So I bypass the other stuff. It's not, and once again, I want to clarify once again, I'm not saying that it's not important. I'm not saying that we have to do all of those things, but to answer the question, what are the key metrics that marketers should be paying attention to? We should be paying attention to how fast leads are getting converted into qualified opportunities. Everything else that we do, we have to do. It's part of the business, right? No matter what. And then probably some marketers are probably not going to hear like me saying this one.
Go.
But sales cycle velocity.
Hmm.
So, because everyone says, well, hey, one marketing hands off to sales, it's not really, no, 1,000% is still your, until that becomes a qualified opportunity. If we are being attributed as marketers and we are being held accountable for our association to revenue, then we really have to understand this is what is the sales cycle velocity of this, right? And if we don't understand that metric, we're going to go to the board and we're going to be like, we generated X amount of leads and turned into 50 opportunities. And if we cannot answer, by the way, you're not going to see the revenue and return on this in 6 months because that's the sales cycle. That's the standard sales cycle as a company that we're hitting. Then you're going to be held accountable for, well, okay, how many of those are, and you're going to have to answer those questions on the fly. So sales cycle, I describe this as marketing is that one person in school on the team project that has to just make sure everything and everyone is doing their job. I get it. I get people don't want to hear that, but that's it. We're that person, right? We're that person that says, is sales following up with these people? Because we're not, hey, we marketing qualified people and you go do what you got to do now.
Yeah, my
And that's
job's
on the,
done. Like,
yeah, hence the rise of the CRO and
yes,
revenue operation. People who can consistently see it over it. And that's where CMOs and marketing teams are getting bumped down and we're losing credibility. And they're like, okay, well, we're just going to hire someone to do it. So you have to understand that you are the team lead, the group lead. You are the person that's making sure the team project is on time. You got to make sure that the sales is, like, you just have to do it in this day and range.
that's it. That's it. I told you that this was going to be a hard conversation for the audience, but hey, here we are, right? Like, okay, fantastic. I mean, stay up on your soapbox a little bit longer, Raja, because for this next question, man, like, a status quo in your area of expertise that you passionately disagree with, and why?
I think I actually just kind of covered a little bit of that
Yeah,
in the last
I
soapbox,
think you
right?
did, but
So yeah, it's if we're talking specifically to marketers, right? So if your sales, cover your ears, right? A sales job is very simple, in my opinion. You sell deals, you have a quota, you don't meet that quota, you're not working at that company anymore, right? As marketers, the reason the rise of what we consider revenue operations, and if you Google revenue operations, the idea is to see everything: marketing, sales, and customer success. And then if you really go down to the second page, they add on like seven other things that, finances and all this other stuff. But the reality is that's what revenue operations as a revenue operations leader is supposed to do. The What I passionately disagree with uh, is that CMOs can't do the same thing. A chief marketing officer has to be able to see all of those components in order to ensure marketing is being success. Like marketing is successful. And I think this obsession with handoffs, right, is just so ludicrous that when you do the handoff, you don't know how revenue is being impacted. And if you don't know if revenue is being impacted and the executives don't know how your contribution to revenue is being impacted, then you are, for lack of a better word, a, a resource that is tangible and just kind of spending their days spinning the wheels, right? So revenue matters. And this is why I say that when we talk about KPIs, it's these things that you want to measure and revenue sits alone. And you have to not focus on it and you're not attributed to it like sales is, but you have to understand what revenue is being generated of your marketing initiatives. And if that means you're the one doing it, that means you're the one doing it, right? So it's not like you have to measure it quarter. There's like I talked about, like brand equity, market trust, like customer education. Those are strategic assets that involve you and increase your brand presence, and marketing owns that. But for the longest time, we owned a lot more. Now we just own those because we are not seen as people that understand it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that if leadership cuts those in favor of what's immediately attributed, you end up with a short-term pipeline. And I think the reason we look at short-term pipeline is because we've removed ourselves by ourselves. Like, we've removed ourselves from the conversation of being a strategic support to the company and as, just kind of fluff type kind of concepts. So I think, if I disagree with the idea that marketing has to back off. I disagree with the idea that there is handoff. Like, no, if you're a CMO and you're in marketing, you need to understand the customer, you need to understand the prospect, and you need to understand end to end what's going on in order to better structure your marketing campaigns. Which, by the way, not a lot of people, I guess, like that take, but hey, it is what it
There you are, man. There you are. But
is.
that's also part of the reason why a lot of people internally within the organization view marketing as a cost center versus a profit center, right?
And that term of marketing as a cost center is, I wouldn't say it's necessarily new. It's
No.
new in the age of Martech.
Yes.
During the Martech boom, I think what it exposed was the inability for marketers to involve themselves into a broader conversation
Right.
than just marketing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the idea is like, well, you're going to be looked at as a cost center if you cannot attribute, if you cannot show and you don't understand the sales side of things. I'm not saying you have to sell. You just have to understand what the sales velocity, volume, everything that we mentioned before is. And if you don't understand how long it takes you to close an opportunity, then you don't know how many leads someone needs, how many marketing qualified, I'm using air quotes here, how many marketing qualified leads you need to generate to fit into your sales velocity. And if you don't know that metric, then you're just going to be, once again, you're going to be looked at as someone that is just costing the company money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Raja, 2 more questions. I'm going to let you go. All right. So here comes the bonus question. So if you were to go back and learn a new skill, what would it be and why?
Well, now see, I got like 3 follow-up questions to that follow that question.
Okay.
What time period are we talking about, right? Like, if we were to go back, like, during the Martech boom, are we talking about prior to Martech? Like, give me a little bit of
Yeah. All
context.
right, all right, all right, all right. All right. Like, maybe I'll simplify it. Like, go back maybe 10 years ago.
Stock investments. No, I'm just kidding. Um, I would really wanna focus more on, like, I'm not sure if this is a skill or a tech, but the outcomes. I think a lot of in my life, I learned what I'm talking about now. I learned very later in life. I was a solutions architect and a developer my entire life, right?
Okay.
And I didn't understand all of these reasons. I just wanted to finish what I needed to finish. And I think understanding the business details, and I'm not sure if this is directly answering your question,
Mhm.
but understanding how everything that I've done relates to some sort of business
Okay.
outcome
Yeah.
would actually probably have helped me sell myself even a little bit better as I was kind of like coming up and out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's
And
a
if
good
you're
one.
looking for more of like, yeah, and if they're looking for more of a technical understanding, then I would probably say uh, definitely more coding.
Mhm.
Definitely a little bit more hands on with coding from a personal perspective.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That that would have been the thing that I would have gone back and learned too, because I can't write a line of code to save my life. But
I know how to hack and slash it, but like raw code is a little bit,
yes.
it's especially a little bit different, which is kind of weird when you say that, oh, you have a solutions architect and a dev background, but it's
Mhm.
definitely inside products from a dev
Right.
perspective, not
Right.
like a true dev.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. Raja, this has been a great conversation. So thanks again for your time and for sharing your experience with the listeners. Quick introduction to yourself and how folks out there can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So my name is Raj. I've been inside marketing as kind of like I've been in marketing prior to the tech boom back since about 2011. When products started rolling out, I was essentially there at the epicenter of it and learned all the products. Failed a lot as well. A lot of my experience actually, John, comes from failures as much as successes, to tell you the truth. Because when people were learning technology, you were just kind of figuring stuff out. So, I've been doing it. I've been in the strategic side of things. I've been in the dev side of things. I've worked for corporations. I've worked for mid-sized businesses to startups, and then I started my own agency here about 2018. People can reach out to me directly by just going to the website. My email is raja at gnwconsulting.com. But if they have any questions on what we do and how we help or how we operate, with all of our clients in this capacity, which I'm very passionate about, is that we're not a marketing agency. We're an operations agency. We're a Martech driven strategic agency, and it's filling in these gaps because that's what we're being asked to do.
Right. Right. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks again for your time. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian. Take care.